Welcome to Mrs. G's Storytime. We are reading Betsy Ten Boom, Promise of God by Mike Evans with permission from Time Worthy Book, and we are on chapter 37. Throughout the occupation, I struggled to maintain my daily dose of liver extract, first prescribed by Dr. Trump and later modified by Dr. Van Veen. Along with it, I also took daily vitamin supplements, which were administered in liquid form. Dr. Van Veen supplied enough of it for Corey and Papa, too. As a result, the food shortage we encountered did not have the same deleterious effect on us as they had on others, and we suffered fewer illnesses than most of our neighbors. Nevertheless, in February of 1944, an outbreak of influenza swept the country, and Corey became ill. I sent her to bed, hoping that by confining her to a room, others in the house might avoid getting sick. The last thing we needed was 12 people coughing in the night. With Corey unable to work, I spent my days helping tools in the shop in addition to my regular duties upstairs. Corey had been in bed 2 days when William arrived for the Wednesday prayer meeting. That week's gathering was a special meeting that commemorated the day when my great-grandfather and his priests agreed to pray together regularly for the peace of Jerusalem. Noli and Kick were with us, as were several dozen others. Papa came up from the shop, too. As William was beginning, Louis appeared in the parlor doorway and gestured for me. I excused myself and went out to see what he wanted. "There's a man downstairs to see you," he explained. "Can't it wait?" I asked. "We're just beginning." He said it was urgent. Reluctantly, I followed Louis downstairs to the shop, where I found the visitor waiting near the display case. "We need to talk," he said, "in private." I didn't know him and didn't feel comfortable meeting with him alone. This was as private as it gets around here. Everyone here pretty much knows everyone else's business. "How can I help you?" He introduced himself as Jan Vogel, a carpenter from Almelo, a town situated about 100 kilometers east of Amsterdam. He was a long way from home, and I was immediately suspicious. "My wife and I have been helping Jews in our area," he explained. "Hiding some, finding places for others with families who think as we do." Something in his voice didn't sound right. The words were correct, but the way he said them made it all seem hollow and meaningless. I was still thinking about how far he'd traveled to get to us, so I said, "Almelo is a long way from here. Why have you come to me?" 2 days ago, my wife was arrested. The officer in charge of her case says he will release her if I can pay him 600 guilders. Otherwise, he will turn her over to the Germans, and I will never see her again. I studied his face as he spoke, but saw no light in his eyes, no fire of passion when he mentioned his wife. His eyes never quite met mine, and he still hadn't told me why he came to us for help. We were a long way from his home. "So you had to come all the way here to find someone who would give you the 600 guilders? I said it more as an observation rather than a question. But if he had no answer, I intended to send him away. I asked, and they said you were the person to see, that you had helped many and you never turned anyone away. That was a key phrase, never turn anyone away. Corey and I had said that to each other many times. It was our method of operation, our ethos, a driving principle. Only someone who knew us would know that about us. I was both curious and scared by the remark. "Who told you that?" "Many," he replied. "That is what they all say. Practically everyone I asked said you were someone who could help and someone who would." He was saying all the right words, but never once made eye contact with me. I could not escape the thought that if he had saved the train fare for a round trip from Almelo to Haarlem and back, he would be well on his way to having enough for the bribe. "I don't know," I said with a slow shake of my head. "Bribing police officers is a risky business." "I can take care of him myself," Vogel said. "I can deliver the money. I just don't have it to deliver." "How much time do you have?" "The policeman will be there tonight. If I bring him the money, he will let her go immediately. If I don't, she'll be sent to prison in the morning." It was a tough choice, and for the first time that I could recall, the intuitive part of my mind was in conflict. 1,000 bells were ringing in my head telling me to send him away, and 1,000 more told me that I should help. I needed help discerning the truth, and there was only one person I trusted to give it to me. So I said, "Wait here." Then I turned towards the steps and started back up the staircase. Corey was asleep in bed when I reached her room, but I shook her awake, told her about Vogel's request. She listened attentively and thought for a moment, then said, "Tell him to come back in the afternoon. We'll have the money by then. That will give us time to think it over." Saying we'll get the money isn't the same as actually giving it to him. That made me feel better, but I was still anxious. She was right. Saying we would get the money wasn't the same thing as actually doing it. And if we were subject solely to local authorities, I would have felt more confident. But we weren't. We were under the control of the Germans, who saw themselves as occupiers of a land filled with humans far inferior to themselves. They would think nothing of trampling Netherlands law. Should we even do that, I asked? Is it safe to have any connection with him? I don't know if it's safe or not, but we've never turned anyone away, and certainly not because we were afraid. Before we refuse, we should take time to consider it thoughtfully. But Rolf said to be careful, that people would approach us who were informants. "I'm sure they will," Corey smiled, "but that's their problem, not ours." "What do you mean?" "Jesus said we should give to those who ask. If they want to use that against us, they'll have to answer to him for it. Our job is to obey." I was still troubled by Vogel's demeanor, but I had no real argument against Corey's suggestion. So I went downstairs and delivered the message. "Come back later this afternoon. We'll have the money then." He said he'd return at 3. Vogel left and we never saw him again. But not long after he was gone, a squad of German soldiers arrived at the house. Unlike the SS who visited us earlier, these men were serious about searching the Bayeux. Noli, who was still in the prayer meeting, was seated near the front window of the parlor and saw them coming. She pressed the button, and when the buzzer sounded, our guests moved quickly but quietly to the secret room. I took our off-practice position near the top of the stairs and prepared to delay the soldiers as long as possible. Seconds after the warning, the door to the shop flew open and a squad of men rushed inside. One of them went immediately to the rear staircase, blocking the exit. The others took positions inside the shop. When they were in place, 2 officers entered. One of them was Captain Bormann. The other identified himself as Lieutenant Kruger. Bormann glanced at Papa and gestured towards the stairs. "Upstairs," he ordered, and then he looked over at Louis and Tooze and told them the same. Papa rose from behind the desk and made his way to the stairs. Louis followed, and as we'd instructed many times before, they walked slowly towards me, taking as much time as possible, but moving fast enough to avoid being abused by the soldiers. I was waiting in the hall when they arrived on the 2nd floor. "Captain Bormann," I said politely, "you are back again." He pointed to the chairs around the kitchen table and said simply, "Sit." We did as he instructed and waited. Kruger called to all the soldiers below. 2 of them came up to where we were sitting. He posted one of them at the parlor door and took the other to search the 2nd floor. Bormann remained with us. He waited impatiently, glancing down the hall as if waiting for word from Kruger. We heard them opening drawers and smashing things on the floor. Tears filled my eyes. Papa seemed unaffected by it. When the search of the 2nd floor produced nothing, Kruger moved upstairs. 4 more men arrived and Bormann dispatched them to assist in the search. Eventually they reached the top floor, rousted Corey from her bed, dragged her down to the kitchen. She joined us at the table and we watched while Bormann methodically questioned those who had been gathered in the parlor for the prayer meeting. Working his way around the room, he seemed to know that William was our brother and Noli our sister, though they had little to do with our affairs at the house. Kik sat quietly staring ahead, his eyes focused on nothing in particular. I'm sure he was worried. Of all of us, he knew the most about where the people we had helped had actually been placed. And at that moment, I realized we'd never given him a plausible story to cover his association with us. One by one, Bormann dismissed members of the prayer meeting who had been uninvolved in our work. Only Tools, Louis, William, Noli, and Kik remained. The others were allowed to leave. When he finished with them, Bormann left the soldier at the parlor door in charge of us and ordered Corey downstairs to the shop. I heard him shouting at her. Once or twice I was sure I heard the sound of a slap. When we waited, I caught the soldier's eye and said, "Would you care for tea?" The water in the kettle on the stove was already hot. "It is unthinkable," he snarled. "For an officer, in the German army to drink from a cup first offered to a Jew. Papa opened his mouth to say something, but the soldier growled at him. "Shut up, old man. I don't want to get rough with you." A few minutes later, Borman returned with Corrie. Her cheeks were red and her hair was a mess, which confirmed my earlier notion that he had slapped her face. I expected to receive the same when he grabbed me by the arm, snatched me from the chair, and dragged me down the steps. When we reached the shop, he jerked me around to face him and said in an angry voice, "We have reports of people entering this house and never leaving, yet I see no one except the group that was praying in the room upstairs." He pressed his face closer and snarled, "Even that is illegal. But what I want to know is, where are the Jews?" "We have no Jews," I replied. Quickly then I could see it coming. He struck me across the face with the back of his hand. "Do not lie to me," he shouted. "I have that idiot Vogel. He has given you up. We know that you were planning to help him bribe a police officer in order to gain the release of his Jew-loving wife. He gave us names and locations of many witnesses who will testify that you have been assisting Jews in their effort to escape deportation. So, Miss ten Boom, I'll ask you again. Where are the Jews you've been hiding?" "There are no Jews," I said, this time more forceful than before. Borman grabbed a handful of my hair and jerked it hard, pulling me towards him as he lowered his voice. "I have visited here before," he said calmly. My head was pressed against his chest so tightly that the buttons of his jacket dug into my flesh. "I know you are the reasonable one," he continued. "Can you not give me a straight answer and save yourself more misery?" "Misery?" I replied. "I have seen what you do to the Jews, loading them on trucks and hauling them away. I have heard reports of what happens to them at the camps. Worked all day and fed very little while they slowly starved to death. Others shot on sight, and I've heard you are now gassing them in mass killings. Do you not fear for the loss of your soul?" He struck me again, and when I bent over in pain, clutching my cheek, he grabbed me by the hair once more and pulled me closer again. "Do not speak to me of my soul or of God or any of your religious nonsense." His voice was cold and his eyes were ablaze. "Your God is a product of your imagination. Now I will ask you once more, where are the Jews?" "We have no Jews," I replied. Frustrated, he could not get a better answer. He shoved me towards the stairs and shouted, "Get up there with the rest of your vermin family." I made my way to the kitchen and found the table piled with silver and gold dinnerware plundered from the storage places throughout the house. Borman was sweating and he wiped his brow with the sleeve of his jacket. Then he looked over at Pop and said, "Old man, I would—" Just then the telephone in the shop rang. Borman was startled by the sound. "How is it that your phone rings?" It rang again, and he took me by the arm. "You will answer it, but you must not tell them I am here. If you do," he said, pointing to Pop and Corrie, "they will die." Then he shoved me towards the staircase and hustled me down to the shop. When I picked up the receiver, the caller was talking excitingly. I had to shout to get his attention. Borman pulled the receiver away from my ear so he could hear. The caller asked about the shop hours, which was a code for whether it was safe to come. I answered in an equally cryptic manner, telling him that we were open but parts were scarce, and we could not guarantee timely repairs. That should have been sufficient to end the call right then, but he kept going, apparently either unfamiliar with what I was saying or too excited to care. "You're in great danger," he blurted out all at once. "They have slurring." The bell for the shop door rang, diverting Borman's attention. While he was distracted, I hung up the phone. Kruger, who had come downstairs after us, opened the door to find a middle-aged Jewish woman. "Is this ten Boom's walk shop?" she asked. "Yes," Kruger said with a smile. "Would you like to come inside?" He stepped back from the door and she entered the shop, all the while saying, "They came from my husband this morning. He sent me out the back door and I haven't been back." She fell abruptly silent when she saw the soldiers in uniform. Kruger had a satisfied smile as he ordered her upstairs to join the others. I wondered why anyone would ring the bell when we were obviously in danger. Then my gaze fell upon the Alpina sign still in the window, and my heart sank. With that in place, everyone would think that the shop was safe. The soldiers would continue to wait, all the while netting unsuspecting visitors as they arrived to ask for help. And that's what they did, sending us back to the kitchen while Kruger manned the door. Late that afternoon, After 5, more unsuspected people had been nabbed in the shop. The telephone rang once more, and I was ordered downstairs to answer it. When I told the caller that we were no longer accepting watches for face repair, he hung up. Borman realized the word was out and that no one else would be coming. He stationed 2 of his men at the house, one at the front door, the other at the rear. And then he turned to those of us who were his prisoners to get our coats. We all donned our coats and hats and followed Kruger up the street to the police station. That's the end of chapter 37, and 38 we'll find out what happens next. I love you. I'm praying for you. And bye-bye for now.